For me, you and I have talked a lot about this. It's the speed at which everything's changing today that's really driving the need for companies to think differently about how they sell. We have a customer whose competitors announced tripling their global coverage. And we had dinner with an executive that night. We're asking that executive, what does that mean in terms of your value proposition? How long will it take to determine what that means? Get that messaging down to your salespeople, 8,000 salespeople around the globe. And so we look today at the shift of our customers' value propositions, their competitors' value propositions, the needs of their customers. Those things are shifting so quickly that in the past, sort of strategic planning happened annually and people had a relatively fixed value proposition. And now things are so fluid that it really comes down to selling at the speed of change and being able to adapt to the market as it's shifting, have words coming out of salespeople's mouths tomorrow, not a month later, that reflect the shift. So for me, that's really what's driving, sort of the driving force behind the shift. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's interesting. I spoke at a conference in Norway a while back, and I did the keynote before lunch, and there were two Swedish economists who wrote a book called Funky Business, which I highly recommend. But they got up and they started off after lunch, and they said, here's the problem in the marketplace today. The buyer's perception is that there's a whole bunch of similar companies who are going out and hiring similar people with similar backgrounds and similar education who are producing similar things with similar quality and similar pricing.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to that going, wow. I mean, if that's true, then what's going on in the marketplace? In reality, I think a lot of companies are still focused when you say, what's your value add? They go, let me tell you about my product.
Right.
And I think product life cycles have collapsed so much in the last decade that if you don't have a feature or function today, you're going to have it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so if it's not what you sell that's your advantage, then it's got to turn into how you sell. Because if you allow the buyer to perceive that everything's similar, then it's going to be true. And so you've got to be able to go out there and have your salespeople go out and articulate a totally different message. And sales transformation to me is getting the right rep, first off, working with the right prospect, doing the right things, using the right messagings to motivate them to do the right thing right now.
Right.
And if you don't do those things, somebody else is going to come in and do that. And I think the company that turns how it sells into a competitive edge is going to be the one that dominates their marketplace.
Yeah. I think you said to me once that data is the new oil for salespeople. Does that sound right? That it's really, and as we've talked about actionable insight, that with the speed at which things shift today, I think a professor from Columbia, Rita Gunther McGrath, just wrote a book called The End of Competitive Advantage, basically saying that this again, back to that notion of the idea of annual strategic planning and a relatively static value proposition, that now companies need to compete on a series of short-term transient advantages. I don't believe that the sort of people who support salespeople in this new world are ready for that, which is where sort of this need for really shifting sales enablement and sales transformation is that this world has shifted and we're sort of still going about it the same way.
I think, Brian, the actual thing that we see going on is if you think about oil, oil drove industry, but when you take oil out of the ground, it's sludge. I mean, it's totally non-useful. So you've got to put it through a refining process to turn it into lubricants or into energy or whatever it is. Similarly with data, there's tons of data out there. And what you need to do is go through that same refinement process to create actionable insights. I mean, I can go Google International Business Machines today and I can get 136 million pages of information. That's a lot of data. It's useless. So I think as soon as companies can figure out a way to refine that data, turn it into insights, that's when we're really going to start enabling salespeople.
Yeah, it's funny. We've talked about the idea of small data. There's big data, but when you say actionable insights, that's what I think about. That we really need to get it down to sort of the right data at the right time in the right format, so salespeople can actually use it.